If you're someone who is teaching your butt off and you're still not getting your students to pay attention and engage in the learning, then today's video is for you. I'm gonna go over 3 bad habits that are killing your engagement and what teachers should do to fix that problem. Now, student engagement is a problem for both new and veteran teachers alike. We want our students to not only want to learn, but to also be active participants in the learning. We don't necessarily just want to be standing at the front of the room delivering the information while the students just sit there and take it. In our minds, the students are just absorbing the information like sponges and they're just eating it up, when in reality, it's a lot harder to accomplish that. Plus, when students are engaged, it increases the likelihood that they're going to pay attention rather than goofing off and distracting other people. So before we get into those 3 bad habits, be sure to engage in the like button and the subscribe button so that you don't miss any future videos. On this channel, I help teachers so that they thrive and not only survive their first few years of teaching, and also for those of you that are out there who actually still like teaching but just need some extra help. So subscribing ensures that you are going to get all the best information from someone who's been teaching for 21 years. So the first bad habit that I'm pretty sure you're doing if your students are not engaged is you're talking too much. Yes, we really just need to stop talking so darn much. In fact, we need to be conscious about the amount of time that we spend talking during a class period. In this post-pandemic world, people's attention spans have shrunk dramatically. Just imagine all the people who were scrolling endlessly while in lockdown being entertained by 10 to 15-second videos. That's how short their attention spans are. In fact, recent studies have shown that the human attention span has decreased by 25% between 2000 and 2015. We now have a shorter attention span than a goldfish. So the rule of thumb for attention spans is 2 to 3 minutes per year of age. That means that your average 14-year-old has an attention span of 28 to 42 minutes. That's 28 to 42 minutes of something that they're actually interested in. So they could be watching someone play a video game or do some kind of dance or maybe a concert of their favorite musician for 28 to 42 minutes. But listening to you, not necessarily. Not all things are created equal. And so if you're not engaging them and you're talking all the time, you're definitely not even getting half that amount. So knowing this, it's important that we not only adjust our expectations of how long students will pay attention and how long we can hold their attention, but also we have to reconsider how we deliver information and how long we spend delivering that information. We have no idea how much we talk, and we need to put ourselves in our students' shoes. You've been in meetings where you have sat there and someone was talking at you for an indefinite amount of time about something that you didn't care about. You need to expect that the students feel that way about your subject, no matter how much they like you. If you're boring and you're talking too much, your students are not going to listen. We have to be able to empathize with that. This means that teachers have to strike a balance between lecturing, facilitating discussions, and really important, think time. A lot of times we don't give students enough time to think about what we just said and to process it, especially when we ask students a question and there's an awkward silence and then you just start talking over them or randomly calling on people before they've had a chance to really formulate an answer for you. So it's really important that you give them that think time even before you let them discuss, because there's always going to be that student who's ready to go, they have the answer already, they talk over their group and no one else gets to actually come up with an answer on their own. So silent individual think time for 30 seconds, which feels like an eternity, it seriously kind of feels like torture, but give them that time to think, and that will also keep them engaged because they're trying to get into the topic and the subject and really trying to come up with something on their own. And haven't you ever been in a situation where you're trying to read something and there's somebody else who's just like talking and yapping in your ear and you can't concentrate on what you're reading or trying to think about? Imagine that your student is listening to your voice all period long or for an hour and they have no time to actually think and process what it is that you just said. And if you have special ed students or English learner students in your classroom, they need even more think time. They're trying to just understand and translate what you said. And so if all you do is talk and talk, they're just catching up and they're not necessarily taking in that information and really learning it. So how can we change this habit? Well, the first thing we need to do is to figure out just how much we talk. So set a recorder and record a lesson. You can just do an audio recording. It does not need to be a video recording, especially if you're afraid to be on camera. And then take some time listening to it, timing yourself and seeing how long you talk before you let the students talk and before you let the students do individual work or think. After that, you need to try to pare it down to where you're talking for, say, no more than 10 to 15 minutes. At that point, when you're practicing how to talk less, you're gonna set that timer and you're gonna stop talking after that 10, 15 minutes. No matter where you're at, you are gonna start talking and you are going to ask some kind of question or prompt the students to think and then have a discussion. They need to talk it out and discuss what it is that they just learned. Now, how I do this is I pre-plan the discussion questions that I'm gonna give them at certain points in the lessons. And then I pause, let them think, and have them discuss it in their groups. And I especially do this even if I've only been talking for 10 minutes and let's say it's at the end of the day and students are really tired. You can sometimes see like their eyes glazing over and they're leaning on their hands and they're not paying attention. A good way to kind of get things going and to try to pep them up is to just stop and just say, okay, and then you ask them a question and say, discuss this in your groups, and all of a sudden they wake up and then you can continue again with what you were teaching them. I also let them know that I'm going to use my participation cards to randomly call on a name, so that means that all of them have to participate in the discussion and pay attention and try to remember what they discussed just in case I call on them, because nobody wants to be caught without having an answer. So how about you? How long do you think you talk before you let students talk or do work? Go ahead and take a guess and put it in the comments below. I'm curious if you think that you only talk for 15 minutes or if you talk for longer and you just don't know it. So the second bad habit that's killing your engagement is kind of an obvious one. You're not being engaging. So there's the possibility that not only are you talking too much, but you're boring. Yes, I called you boring. And while I've read and heard numerous times that teachers are not there to entertain students, I can tell you without a doubt that students will focus, they'll process and retain what it is that you're teaching even more if you're at least somewhat entertaining. So this obviously doesn't mean that you need to do a literal song and dance for them, unless that's kind of your thing. If it is, then you do you. But you don't want to be one of those really boring teachers where students are obviously yawning and falling asleep in your class. So a good first step is to just bring out the fun side of you. Whatever that is, your normal outside of school fun self, bring that into your classroom. Now, if you're only fun after some beer pong and some shots, then bring the fun side of you that doesn't involve that kind of paraphernalia. Because here's the thing, if you would be bored as your own student, I can 100% guarantee that your students are bored to tears in your class as well. You know that saying, be the change you want to see in the world? Well, be the teacher that you would love to have as a student, not the teacher that you had as a student. So after you've brought that fun side of you, then you're gonna try a variety of different activities and different ways of teaching. So as I mentioned before, number one, you're gonna talk less. And then you're going to mix it up with some group work, some individual work, maybe some gamification. And if you have questions that you have to ask students, then you can ask them some standard questions and mix it in with some more maybe hypothetical or even silly questions. I remember my high school physics teacher, Mr. Pavovar, he hated cats. He loathed cats. And so a lot of his physics problems involved things happening to cats. Side note, I have 2 cats and I love cats, but I still found it hilarious. So instead of just learning about force or projectiles and things like that, he was shooting cats out of cannons in his word problems. And that just made his class that much more fun, even though I had no clue what was going on. Another really good way of engaging students is to make what they're learning relevant to their lives. So if you can somehow connect what they're learning learning in math or English or science or history or even PE, whatever it is, if you can make it apply to real life, then they're gonna be more engaged. So one way that you would go about doing this is to find out what they're interested in. You might have to go on social media. If you're not on TikTok yet, that's okay. You can just go and check it out. Also, I found that if you just ask students about what it is that they're into, you can take a poll and say, who's Bad Bunny? And why do we care about this bunny? Why is this bunny so bad? And they're gonna laugh at you because Bad Bunny's not an actual bunny. But they have an opportunity to teach you something, and then you can look it up and find a way to incorporate it into your teaching somehow, which will definitely make your lessons more sticky. I actually love to play ignorant with my students and pretend like I don't know what something is. I remember when spilling the tea came out and I asked them, why is everyone spilling tea? It's a hot liquid, aren't they burning themselves? And they thought it was hilarious, and they get to have a laugh at your expense. Don't be hurt about it, but they get to have a laugh at your expense, and it's funny for them to teach you something for once. And then all of a sudden, the whole class is in a good mood and you can proceed with the lecture and they're just a little bit more engaged. Another way that you can engage students is to also give them some student choice. Kids love to have a say. Whether it's what they eat or what they wear, what they're doing at a particular time, they love to have choice. So if you can somehow build that into some of your assignments, if you can say, all right, you can choose to do problems 1 through 10 or 11 through 20. That gives them choice, and they're gonna do those problems, even if it's basically the same types of problems. Or you can have a choice board that looks like a tic-tac-toe board, and they have to either go across or diagonal or up and down. Either way, they have to do 3 of the 9 boxes, and they're still demonstrating their learning in some way, but they have some choice, and they can show you what they learned in their own way. Now, before I move on to the last bad habit that's probably killing your engagement, I want you to know that I made a freebie with all of these listed out and a checklist to see whether or not you are doing these bad habits and how you can also fix them. So if you want that all in one place rather than taking notes with this video, go ahead and click on the link in the description box below. So the last bad habit that is killing your engagement in class is being inflexible. Now, I know that this sounds cliche, but education is always changing. Are you? Are you stuck in a certain way of teaching? Or even worse, are you teaching the way that you were taught back in the day, thinking that that's how it's supposed to be done? Because teachers need to be flexible in terms of how they teach based on the needs of their students, their environment, the grade they teach, the subject they teach. Either way, we need to be flexible and always changing to adapt. Expecting your classroom to run in a way that doesn't align with the reality of your current situation is just going to lead to disaster. Not only will you be disengaging to your students, but you're going to be really frustrated by their apathy and lack of willingness to participate. So you may have learned in school, or maybe even taught during a time when students just sat in rows and quietly took notes while the teacher lectured at the front. If you do that now, especially after the pandemic, one or more of 2 things will happen. Number 1, your students will tune you out and not pay attention and definitely not learn the material. And or number 2, they're gonna be disruptive because of how bored they are. So you have to match your own expectations with how a classroom should run with what is actually happening in front of you. One way that you may be disengaging your students is by being inflexible and giving them consequences even for the smallest of infractions. So this may be them having to use the bathroom. That happens. Or they forgot their pencil. That definitely happens. But giving them detention because they didn't have a pencil, that may feel like you're controlling them, that you're keeping them in check. But what's actually happening is that they're gonna end up resenting you and definitely not engaging. If you try to use fear to control your class, all you're gonna get is compliance, but the students will be disengaged and won't buy in. So being stuck in a certain way of teaching, even though it's not working in your classroom, is only gonna lead you to hate teaching in the long run. Another way that you may be inflexible is kind of on the flip side, and that's where you're trying to be too cool or too fun, or even worse, you're trying to be your student's friend. When you do this, your students may like you and think you're cool and fun, but they definitely don't respect you. In fact, they're gonna take over your classroom. When you want them to be quiet and you want them to work, or settle down, they're gonna think, oh, that's so funny, that's so cute. They're trying to get us to behave, and they're just gonna take over and they won't listen to you. And some teachers are so inflexible about this that even when they get feedback or advice from another colleague or an administrator, they just dig their heels in because honestly, they love the feeling of being loved by their students no matter what the consequences. And I get it. It feels good when it seems like your students are engaged. It feels good when your students like you. But this is not educational engagement at this point. This is just playtime for them. The kind of engagement that we want is educational engagement, where they're actually interested in the learning and not just socializing. By being inflexible this way, you're actually going to end up being constantly frustrated by their bad behavior, and then all of a sudden you have to be a jerk for being a mean teacher because you finally have to get them to settle down, especially if you have an observation or something like that. So just like with the other two habits, there needs to be a balance. You can be someone who is lenient enough where you understand what the students are going through. Maybe they forgot their pencil because they go back and forth between two homes and sometimes they leave their materials at the other house. And at the same time, you don't want to just be the fun teacher who lets everyone get away with everything, and maybe you pick and choose who gets consequences, and that just seems unfair to everyone. The key to being more flexible, whether it's to lighten up or just be a little bit firmer with your directions and your demeanor, is to constantly evaluate. Also, it's important to get feedback from someone you respect as a teacher. Don't get butthurt by it, and make sure that whoever is observing you, that they're being honest with you and it's someone who you trust. This is really important that we constantly get feedback, especially when things aren't going the way that we want in our classroom. If students aren't engaged, we can ask this trusted colleague or even an administrator, if you trust them, to see if you're doing one of these three habits. And if so, come up with a way together that you can start working on them so that your students will finally be engaged. So I hope you found these tips helpful and that you'll go down into the description box below and grab that freebie that has all of these listed out as well as the suggestions. And if you're still struggling with lesson planning, be sure to click on this video to help demystify the process.